The 60s and 70s were a time of automotive innovation, with new sleek designs constantly being introduced to the market. The Maserati Ghibli stunned the market with its long, low hood line, compact cabin, and abruptly cut-off cam-tail rear end. The Ghibli is a quad-cam, 4.7-liter dry-sump V8, producing just over 300 horsepower with a 0 to 60 time of 6.8 seconds and a top speed of 155 miles per hour. Power is put to the ground with a ZF 5-speed manual transmission. The ZF is German-engineered, so it's reliable, shifts smooth, and makes for an enjoyable driving experience. Ghibli is derived from the hot, dry, southwesterly winds of the Libyan desert, which is an allude to the sleek design of the car and where the name comes from. This 1970 Maserati Ghibli is the perfect combination of sleek styling and awesome power. Now, manufacturers nowadays try to remake some of the classics, such as the Ford GT, which was a really good recreation of the infamous GT40, and it was a great success. However, sometimes it doesn't work out so great, like with the Maserati Ghiblis. The modern cars kind of tarnish the classic car name, because the modern Ghiblis are more known for their pretty bad depreciation and high maintenance costs rather than anything else. So if you're going to be thinking of the Maserati Ghibli, just ignore and put out of your mind the new cars and try and think of the classics like this one, which are easy to maintain, they're fairly reliable for Italian cars of the 70s, and you can just go cruising at 100 miles an hour with no issues. This Ghibli was sold new in December of 1970 to Wes Farrell, who was married to Tina Sinatra, Frank Sinatra's daughter. It was registered to his company, Coral Rock Productions, as Mr. Farrell was a very successful songwriter and producer who wrote close to 500 songs with 300 million records sold in the 60s and 70s. In March of 1972, this car was sold to Frank Sinatra. We have copies of the registration in Frank Sinatra's name and all the correspondence from Nancy Sinatra confirming her father's ownership. This car was later sold to George Hamilton, an American actor of the 70s and 80s. Then, to continue the famous ownership chain, the car was again sold to Dave Thomas, the founder and owners of the Wendys restaurants. Along with the paperwork, the registration copies we have on file in Frank Sinatra's name, another part of the history of this car that proves it was Sinatra's car is the license plate. He liked putting FAS, Frank Albert Sinatra, on all his cars. So he had FAS 1, 2, 3, and this is number 4. It was one of the things he always did with his cars, and the fact that the car still has the license plate today is really special. Another unique feature about this Ghibli in particular is the 3 taillights. Most of these cars had a big long rectangular taillight, not these 3 dots. So this is, I've been told, a factory option for these cars that just wasn't very common. So it makes it a little more unique than all the other Ghiblis out there. One of my favorite cars has always been the Ferrari Daytona, and this Maserati Ghibli reminds me a lot of the Daytona, but a bit more of a compact version. So the Daytona is a big front-engined heavy V12, and it kind of is hard to wrangle around. Whereas with the Ghibli, because it's a V8, it's a lot lighter, it's more compact, and it has power steering, so it's just a lot easier to drive. So if you're driving these on a regular basis, the Ghibli is probably the better choice just because of the ease of use. Also, the car comes with air conditioning and other luxury accommodations like that just make it a little easier if you want to go out on a hot summer day. You're not kind of, restricted to the early morning or late afternoon when the sun's not beating down on you. You have more of the opportunity to drive it whenever you want because it's going to cooperate, it's going to behave, it's going to work well for you, and it's going to keep you comfortable. So as I was saying before, the nice thing about the Maserati Ghiblis is the power steering and the air conditioning. So you're really driving in luxury when you're in this car. Now, a couple of the more confusing things is it has a lot going on the dash. So there's a lot of gauges and buttons and switches and stuff to try and figure out. So when you first buy this car, if you've never driven one before, it's a bit of a learning curve. So for instance, this big button right in the middle of the dash is for the headlights to pop up. Some of these are labeled, but a lot of them is just kind of press the button and find out what happens. For example, on the steering column, there's a button that actually adjusts the steering wheel. So it's not much of an adjustment. You can move it forward a little bit and back a little bit, maybe an inch or so, but in the late 60s, early 70s, that was a new concept. They didn't have adjustable steering wheels back then. So it made it a lot more diverse, and a lot more people could buy it, because even though it's a small difference, to some people, that's all it takes to have the difference between a comfortable drive and not wanting to drive it because you're just really cramped. This car is in impressively good shape for its age. The paint on the outside, we assume, has been redone at some point because it's basically too nice to be original. However, the interior, we believe, is all original, from the headliner, the seats, everything. It even still has the original radio. And a lot of times with these cars throughout the years, especially 10, 20 years ago, when they weren't as valuable and desirable as they are nowadays, people would change out the radios and toss the old ones because they were, not modern. You can't really use it that well, so just switch it out. But now it makes it more desirable because it's how it came out of the factory and it's all original. This car in particular, with just over 20,000 miles, is why the interior is in such good shape, because it hasn't seen that much use. So it's not really worn down. The seats a lot of times, especially the driver's seat, gets really worn after 30, 40, 50,000 miles, and it just has to be redone. And it's nice knowing that you're sitting in this car, you're sitting in the very spot where people like Frank Sinatra and George Hamilton once were just cruising down the road on their way to their next gig or just to hang out with friends. I have a passion for the older cars like this one, and a lot of people may like the new cars because they're so fast and they're fairly reliable. However, they don't have the history and the personalities of these old cars. Sitting in this car and driving it down the street can take you back to the 70s, and imagine that you're Frank Sinatra headed to meet up with the Rat Pack, or even Wendys, and just thinking of the old commercials that he had in the 80s and 90s. And the new cars may be fast and perform well, but they're not going to give you the same nostalgia, the same feeling, and the same personality of these old cars, which is why I personally have always found these to be more desirable to me. And it's one of the reasons collectors in general will pay top dollar for cars like this with the great histories. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, learned a little bit something new about Maserati Ghiblis in general, and about this car in particular and its amazing history. So if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and hit like, and stay tuned because I got a lot more videos coming out very soon.